The moment Emily Carter stepped into the glass-walled conference room on the 24th floor, she felt something strange stirring inside her, something she tried to ignore for weeks, ever since Daniel Hayes became her new boss. He was calm, composed, and carried the kind of quiet confidence that made everyone look up when he entered a room, and today's team meeting only made it more obvious that he wasn't like the others. Emily tried to focus on the charts on her laptop, but her eyes kept drifting toward him as he led the discussion with his usual steady voice. Halfway through the meeting, she noticed he glanced at her more than once, as if expecting something from her, and that alone made her heartbeat stumble. When the meeting ended, the team rushed out, eager to get to lunch, their voices echoing down the hallway, everyone except Emily, who was carefully packing her notes, hoping her nervous hands didn't show it. Just as she stood up, Daniel's voice cut through the fading chatter. "Emily, can you stay back for a moment?" The words were simple, but they hit her like a soft jolt because nothing in his tone hinted at trouble, only something unspoken. She froze for half a second before turning toward him, watching as he closed his laptop and leaned against the table, his expression thoughtful, almost gentle. The office around them felt too quiet, as if the world outside those glass walls had paused. Emily tried to keep her breathing steady as she waited for him to speak, replaying every task she completed that week, wondering if she forgot something or misread an email. But Daniel didn't look frustrated. Instead, he looked almost unsure, a rare sight for someone who always seemed to have control over every moment. "I wanted to talk to you about your presentation," he said finally, but the softness in his voice made her think there was more to it. Emily nodded, trying to act professional even though her heart raced. He praised her work, her clarity, her dedication, the way she handled a tough question during the meeting, and though she appreciated the words, she sensed he wasn't finished. His eyes held a quiet intensity that made her look away for a second, pretending to adjust her notebook. Once again he paused, like he was choosing his next words carefully. "You've been carrying more than your share lately," he continued, his tone even lower now, "and I want to make sure you're not burning yourself out." She blinked in surprise, no one ever noticed her efforts like that. Emily felt a warmth spread in her chest, both comforting and unsettling. She wanted to say she was fine, that she could handle it, but something in the way he watched her made the truth slip out instead. She admitted she had been struggling a little, trying to prove herself. Daniel listened closely, not interrupting, not judging, and the quiet concern in his eyes made the air between them feel strangely intimate. For a moment, the tense corporate environment dissolved, replaced by the soft hum of the air conditioner and the quiet rhythm of two people standing slightly too close. When Daniel stepped closer, she felt herself instinctively hold her breath. He wasn't invading her space, just closing the distance enough to make the moment feel personal. "Emily," he said softly, "you don't have to prove anything to me." The words sank deep into her chest, hitting a spot she didn't know was waiting to be seen. She wasn't sure if he meant it professionally or something more, and that uncertainty stirred emotions she wasn't ready to name. Before she could respond, a knock echoed from the hallway, a colleague passing by, reminding them the office was still full of people. Daniel stepped back slightly, clearing his throat, and Emily felt the moment shift, the intensity softening but not disappearing. He ran a hand over the edge of the table, looking like he almost wanted to say something else, something he wasn't sure he should say. Emily waited, her fingers curled around the strap of her laptop bag, hoping he would give her some kind of clarity. Instead, he said, "There's actually another reason I asked you to stay." Her heart paused, a mix of curiosity and something deeper rising inside her. Daniel looked at her, his expression unreadable now, his eyes steady, holding something he didn't dare speak yet. And then he took a slow breath, like a man preparing to cross a line he wasn't sure he should cross. But before he could say anything more, his phone rang sharply on the table, cutting through the moment like a blade. He hesitated before picking it up, giving her a look that almost apologized for the interruption. "Give me 1 second, he murmured, answering the call and turning slightly away. Emily stood there quietly, the lingering tension wrapping around her like a fragile thread. She didn't know what he was going to say, but she knew one thing for certain, the conversation was far from over. And whatever he had planned to tell her, It wasn't just about work. After Daniel ended the phone call, the office felt unusually quiet, the usual hum of keyboards and distant voices fading into the background as if the world had paused just for them, and Emily realized she could feel every small detail around her, the faint scent of his cologne, the way sunlight streamed through the tall windows, highlighting his thoughtful expression, and the subtle shift in the air that made her pulse quicken. She tried to focus on her laptop bag in her hands, pretending to organize her notes, but her mind kept returning to the unfinished sentence lingering between them, the words he almost said, the tension that neither of them dared to break. Daniel finally turned fully toward her, setting his phone aside, and the calm authority she had always admired now carried a hint of vulnerability, something rare that made her stomach flutter. "Emily," he began, his voice lower than before, soft but deliberate, "I asked you to stay because there's something I need to tell you, something I've been hesitant to say." She felt her breath catch, a mixture of nerves and curiosity bubbling inside her, and she nodded slightly, trying to appear composed while her heart raced. He stepped a little closer, just enough that she could sense his presence more clearly, the space between them charged with an unspoken emotion that neither work nor reason could explain. Daniel's gaze lingered on her, thoughtful and searching, as though he wanted to find the right words to bridge the gap between professional and personal, and Emily found herself unable to look away, drawn in by the intensity she had never seen in him during meetings or office briefings. "I've noticed how hard you've been working, how much you care about getting things right," he said, his tone softening, almost intimate, "and I wanted you to know that it doesn't go unnoticed." "Not by me." Emily felt warmth rising in her chest, a mix of gratitude and something more complicated, something deeper she wasn't ready to define but couldn't ignore. She swallowed nervously, realizing that his words weren't just about work, they carried weight, an emotional undertone that hinted at concern and understanding beyond the office walls. Daniel paused, looking slightly unsure for a moment, and Emily noticed a flicker of hesitation in his expression that made her feel protective and curious at the same time. He continued, "I respect your dedication, but I also respect you as a person. I don't want to see you exhaust yourself just to prove something to everyone else." The sincerity in his voice struck her unexpectedly, leaving her momentarily speechless, and she felt a wave of emotions, admiration, attraction, and a kind of longing she had tried to ignore, flooding her senses. She wanted to tell him she appreciated his words, but something held her back, the fear of crossing a line mixing with the undeniable pull she felt toward him. Daniel noticed her hesitation and offered a small, understanding smile, the kind that made her feel like she could trust him with things she hadn't even admitted to herself, and that smile made the office feel both intimate and safe at the same time. He moved a little closer, just enough to make the moment feel personal, and she realized that the professional distance between them was fading, replaced by a quiet connection that had been simmering since he became her boss. Emily could feel the weight of his gaze, thoughtful and steady, and it made her heart beat faster, a rhythm she couldn't control, as if the air around them had charged with an emotion she had never expected to experience at work. Daniel spoke again, carefully, almost like choosing each word to avoid misunderstanding. "There's more to what I wanted to say, but I'm not sure how to say it without crossing a line." The honesty in his words surprised her, making her see him not just as her boss but as someone who struggled with emotions just like anyone else, someone who could be vulnerable yet commanding at the same time. Emily found herself leaning forward slightly, her curiosity overpowering her caution, wanting to hear every word, to understand the depth behind his rare vulnerability. He paused again, running a hand lightly along the edge of the conference table, and she noticed the slight tension in his jaw, the faint crease between his brows, signs that he was thinking carefully about what to say next. The silence stretched between them, heavy yet comfortable, charged with an unspoken attraction neither of them acknowledged aloud but both were acutely aware of. Finally, Daniel let out a quiet sigh, his gaze meeting hers fully now, unwavering and sincere, and Emily felt a shiver run through her as if the space between them had compressed into a single, shared moment that existed outside time and office rules. He began, then stopped, as if measuring the impact of his next words, and the hesitation in his tone made her lean in slightly, silently encouraging him to continue. Emily's mind raced with possibilities, not daring to imagine what he might say, yet unable to stop herself from hoping it was more than just about work or recognition. Daniel's voice finally found a steadiness, a gentle firmness. "I value you, Emily. More than just as an employee. I wanted to make sure you knew that I see you." The words hit her heart with a soft, profound weight, creating a mixture of surprise, warmth, and an emotion she hadn't expected to feel at the office. Her chest tightened, and she felt a blush rise to her cheeks, though she tried to remain composed, hiding the rapid beating of her heart behind the professional posture she maintained so carefully in every meeting. The air around them felt charged, yet calm, like a quiet storm of emotion held in check by their mutual restraint. Emily realized she wanted to respond, to speak the truth of what she was feeling, yet the right words wouldn't come. The professional boundary, the unspoken rules, kept her silent, though her gaze remained locked on his. Daniel noticed her hesitation and smiled softly, a mixture of understanding and patience in his expression, the kind of smile that made her feel seen, respected, and yet wanted all at once, a confusing but thrilling combination. He took a small step back, acknowledging the professional limits, but the intensity didn't fade. It lingered in the space between them, in the quiet moments, in the way his eyes held hers with unspoken meaning. Emily realized that this moment had changed everything for her, her perception of him, the dynamic of their relationship, and even the way she felt about going to work. She felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety, unsure what would happen next but unable to stop thinking about the quiet intensity that had filled the office just moments ago. Daniel glanced at his watch, and the spell of the moment broke slightly as the awareness of time returned, but the weight of what had been shared lingered in the air, leaving Emily with a head full of thoughts and emotions she couldn't yet name. As she gathered her things, preparing to leave, she felt a strange reluctance, a desire to stay in that charged space just a little longer, to hear him speak again, to see if the quiet connection they shared could be acknowledged once more. Daniel gave her a nod, a silent reassurance, and Emily left the conference room with her heart racing, knowing that something had shifted between them, that the simple act of staying back had opened a door she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through yet, but that she couldn't stop imagining. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Her tasks felt lighter and heavier at the same time because her mind kept replaying the moment, analyzing every glance, every word, every nuance, and she realized she had never experienced such a complicated mix of admiration, attraction, and professional respect all in one encounter. Even when she left the office that evening, walking through the city streets with the fading sun casting long shadows, she couldn't shake the memory of his soft words, the way he had looked at her, and the quiet vulnerability he had shown that no one else in the office had ever glimpsed. Emily felt a thrilling uncertainty, a kind of emotional tension that made her stomach flutter every time she thought about him, and she knew deep down that this was only the beginning, that the simple act of staying back after a meeting had opened a door to a story she didn't yet understand but couldn't stop imagining, leaving her with a mixture of hope, fear, and longing that would carry her into the next day, when the unfinished conversation would wait for them both, full of possibilities and unspoken truths. The next morning, Emily arrived at the office feeling a strange mixture of anticipation and nervousness, her mind replaying every moment from the previous day, every glance, every word from Daniel, and even the quiet pauses that had seemed loaded with meaning, and she realized that something in her had shifted. She wasn't just walking into work, she was walking into a place where unspoken feelings lingered like a subtle hum in the air, waiting for recognition. She tried to focus on her tasks, opening emails and reviewing reports, but every small sound, footsteps in the hallway, the distant ringing of phones, the hum of the printer, made her look up, half expecting Daniel to appear and continue the conversation from where it had paused. Hours passed, yet the energy between them was palpable even in absent moments. Coworkers chatted around her, laughed over meetings, and moved about in routine, but Emily felt the office transformed, charged with tension she couldn't ignore, a tension that wasn't just about workload but about what was possible between her and Daniel. When he finally walked into her department to discuss a minor update on a client project, her heart leapt, and she had to remind herself to keep her posture professional, even as every instinct in her wanted to approach him differently, to close the gap that neither dared to acknowledge fully. Daniel noticed her, as he always did, with that quiet attentiveness that made her feel both exposed and seen, and he offered a small, polite smile that carried more warmth than he probably intended in a public space. He asked her for a quick clarification on a report, and as they stood side by side going over the numbers, Emily felt a spark in the air, a subtle charge that made even the most mundane spreadsheets feel intimate, and she realized that this connection wasn't about words alone but about presence, proximity, and shared understanding. After the conversation, he gave a slight nod and moved on, but Emily found herself lingering, aware of the fluttering in her chest, wondering what he had meant the day before, what his intentions were, and whether she should take a risk by acknowledging her own growing feelings. During lunch, she wandered down the hall to grab a coffee, only to find him waiting near the break room, reviewing documents, and when their eyes met, time seemed to slow just enough for her to notice the little details, the way sunlight caught his hair, the calm lines of his face, the softness in his expression that contrasted the usual corporate authority he carried. He asked her how she was holding up with her current workload, and though the question sounded routine, the sincerity behind it made her pause, feeling a warmth that was more personal than professional, a quiet concern that made her heart beat faster than she expected. They exchanged a few words, casual at first, then slightly more personal as she mentioned a minor challenge she had been facing with a project, and Daniel listened intently, nodding, offering guidance, but also lingering on the conversation in a way that made the interaction feel more than workplace mentoring. It felt like a slow, careful dance of two people acknowledging a mutual attraction without speaking it outright. Emily realized she was craving more of these moments, these small interactions where work and emotion blurred just enough to make her feel alive in a way she hadn't expected at her desk, and she couldn't deny the thrill that came from simply being near him, the subtle electric pull that made her glance linger longer than necessary. Later in the afternoon, a sudden problem arose with a client report, and Daniel walked over to help, standing close to her as they examined the issue together, their shoulders almost touching, his presence a steady reassurance that made her forget the office noise and deadlines for a brief, fleeting moment. He gave instructions clearly, yet there was a softness in his tone, a gentle patience that made Emily feel valued beyond her work, making her heart swell with emotions she had tried to suppress, a combination of admiration, respect, and a desire she didn't yet have words for. As they resolved the problem together, their hands brushed lightly over the paperwork, a fleeting contact that made her pulse skip, yet neither commented, both pretending the office world was the only reality, even though in that moment, a new, unspoken connection had solidified between them. The day moved on, but Emily found herself distracted, thinking about his words from the previous day, the intensity of his gaze, and the subtle moments that had passed almost unnoticed by others but not by her. She realized she had been waiting for someone to see her like that, to recognize her efforts and her presence, and Daniel had done that in a way that felt rare and personal, and it made her ache with an unfamiliar longing. When the workday ended, she packed her things slowly, walking toward the elevator with a mix of reluctance and anticipation, wondering if he might call her back again, whether they would have another moment alone, another conversation that blurred professional boundaries into something more personal, and she felt both excitement and fear at the idea. As she reached the lobby, she saw him at his office door, watching her with a faint, knowing smile, and her heart stuttered, aware that this small acknowledgement meant more than 1,000 emails or reports could ever convey. She gave a tentative smile back, and he inclined his head slightly, a silent promise of continuation, an unspoken question about whether they were both aware of the growing tension between them. Walking out into the evening air, Emily couldn't help but replay the day in her mind, the shared glances, the subtle touches, the quiet smiles, and the unspoken emotions that hung in every interaction, and she realized that nothing would ever feel the same at the office again. She felt exhilarated and nervous, caught in the delicate balance between desire and propriety, knowing that Daniel's attention had shifted something in her, something she couldn't ignore, and she wondered how he was feeling too, whether he was thinking about the same subtle pull, the same quiet longing that left her heart racing. The next morning promised more interactions, more subtle exchanges, and Emily knew that their story wasn't over, it was only beginning, and the tension, the quiet connection, and the unspoken words would continue to grow, making each day a mixture of professional diligence and emotional anticipation, leaving her breathless with the possibilities that lay ahead, and she couldn't wait to see how the delicate, growing bond between them would unfold. The next morning, Emily arrived at the office with a mix of anticipation and nervous excitement, feeling as though every step she took toward the elevator was leading her closer to a moment she had been imagining since the first conversation with Daniel. the city. Outside the window glowed softly with morning light, reflecting the quiet tension building inside her, and as she walked past coworkers, she realized she could barely focus on anything else because her mind was consumed by him, by the way he looked at her, and by the quiet connection that had grown steadily over the past few days. She settled at her desk, trying to appear busy, opening emails and reviewing reports, but every sound, the click of keyboards, the distant conversations in the hallway, the hum of the air conditioning, made her glance toward the glass-walled conference room, wondering if Daniel would appear, wondering if he would ask her to stay back again, and feeling her heart beat faster with each passing minute. When he finally did appear, walking confidently but with that rare softness she had grown to notice, her breath caught, and she realized that everything about him, the way he carried himself, the slight smile that softened his serious features, the calm but intense presence, made it impossible for her to act entirely professional, though she tried. He asked her a few questions about the morning reports, his tone steady and professional, yet she sensed an underlying warmth, a subtle concern, a lingering thread from the previous day's private moments, and that made every word between them feel charged, significant, and full of quiet meaning. After their brief exchange, he glanced at her, and in that silent look, Emily felt a rush of emotions, gratitude, admiration, longing, and a delicate spark of attraction that made her stomach flutter uncontrollably. She realized that the professional boundary, though still in place, was now infused with unspoken intimacy, and she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. Midday brought a sudden challenge with a client presentation, and Daniel approached to guide her, standing close enough that she felt the warmth of his presence, yet careful to remain respectful. As he explained the details, his voice low but steady, she noticed the way he occasionally looked at her, with those quiet, observing eyes that made her feel seen in a way no one else had, and she felt her heart racing again, caught between admiration and a growing emotional attachment. Their hands brushed lightly as they moved papers and reviewed numbers, a fleeting contact that sent an unspoken message of connection, and Emily's mind spun with thoughts she hadn't intended to think at work, feelings she couldn't yet name, and yet she knew they were real, powerful, and mutual. Daniel noticed her hesitation, her momentary distraction, and he offered a small, patient smile, one that conveyed understanding and reassurance, making Emily feel both comforted and inexplicably drawn to him, aware that the moment was significant, delicate, and potentially life-changing if either of them chose to acknowledge it fully. As the afternoon wore on, Emily found herself looking for small ways to encounter him, to exchange a glance or share a word, knowing that even the briefest interaction carried a weight neither could ignore, and she realized that every conversation, every shared moment, had become a dance of careful attention, mutual curiosity, and subtle attraction that was impossible to dismiss. When the workday ended, Daniel walked past her desk, pausing briefly, and their eyes met in a quiet, unspoken understanding. She felt a thrill at the recognition, the acknowledgement of something growing between them, something emotional, romantic, and deeply personal, yet still wrapped in professionalism. "Emily," he said softly, just loud enough for her to hear, "could you stay back for a moment?" Her heart jumped, echoing the same anticipation and tension as the first time he asked her, and she nodded, walking toward the conference room with a mixture of eagerness and nervousness, feeling that this moment would bring clarity to the quiet connection that had been building over days of glances, small conversations, and fleeting touches. Inside the room, Daniel closed the door gently, and for the first time, he allowed a subtle vulnerability to show in his expression, a softness that contrasted with the usual composed authority he carried, making Emily's heart race and her mind whirl with possibilities. He spoke carefully, slowly, acknowledging the effort and dedication she had shown, but this time, he also admitted something more personal, something that had been growing inside him since the first day he noticed her diligence, attention to detail, and quiet strength, and Emily listened, captivated not just by his words but by the sincerity and emotion behind them. He confessed that he had been drawn to her from the beginning, that her intelligence, kindness, and dedication had not only impressed him professionally but had also stirred something deeply personal, a feeling he hadn't expected but couldn't deny, and Emily felt her chest tighten with a mixture of shock, joy, and a longing she had kept hidden. She realized that the quiet attraction she had felt toward him was reciprocated, that the emotional connection they had built over days of professional interaction had transformed into something tender, intimate, and meaningful, yet still respectful and mature, and she felt a rush of warmth and anticipation at the thought of exploring it further. Daniel noticed the subtle change in her expression, the softness in her eyes, and he stepped slightly closer, still maintaining a respectful distance, offering reassurance and patience, allowing her to process his words and the emotions that came with them. Emily felt a delicate tension between them, a mixture of desire, hope, and the thrill of mutual understanding, and she realized that the professional environment no longer limited the depth of their connection. It had become the backdrop for something much more emotional, intimate, and heartfelt. The conversation continued, filled with pauses, careful words, and meaningful glances, and Emily felt herself opening to the possibility of a relationship that balanced professional respect with personal affection, realizing that the moments of tension, anticipation, and subtle attraction had been leading to this, that their story was reaching a turning point where emotions could finally be acknowledged without fear or hesitation. By the end of the discussion, both of them shared a quiet smile, an acknowledgement of the bond they had created, the mutual attraction, and the deep respect that had allowed their feelings to develop naturally and maturely. Emily felt her heart lighter, her mind clearer, and yet filled with excitement and curiosity about the future, knowing that this chapter of their lives had changed everything. As she left the conference room, walking back through the office, she felt a new sense of confidence, hope, and anticipation, realizing that the delicate, emotional connection they shared had transformed ordinary workdays into moments of meaningful interaction, that every glance and word had built toward something heartfelt, romantic, and emotionally rich, and she couldn't wait to see where it would lead next. Daniel watched her from his desk, a quiet satisfaction in his expression, knowing that their bond had grown stronger through subtle communication, patience, and shared respect, and he felt a sense of promise for the future, a future where emotions, romance, and professional life could coexist gracefully, respectfully, and beautifully. As Emily stepped into the evening light, leaving the office behind for the day, she reflected on the journey of the past week, the glances, the conversations, the small touches, the moments of vulnerability, and felt a thrill at the realization that she and Daniel had built something rare, something emotionally intense yet mature, something that could grow into a relationship full of understanding, care, and quiet romance, leaving her with a sense of anticipation, joy, and the knowledge that their story was only just beginning, that every meeting, every shared project, and every simple stay back could now carry meaning beyond work, into the realm of heartfelt emotion and tender connection.